So first you start delegating the budget stuff and you're like happy to get rid of it. And then you start delegating, sales and other things that, are not so hard for you to give up, but closer and closer you come to the bone of delegating the things that mean the most to you. And that becomes very painful.
Welcome to Startups Decoded, the show that gets real about what it takes to build a successful startup. I'm Andy Walsh, 2 times exited founder, strategist, and your host. Each week I talk with top founders, investors, and operators to unpack the plays that drive real traction, not just headlines. If you're building something bold, this is where you'll get the honest insights to scale with clarity and confidence. Let's keep growing together. Hit subscribe and share with your community. It would mean the world to me. Morrison Foster is the legal edge behind the world's boldest innovators. They go by Mofo and are the team behind Startups Decoded. For decades, Mofo has helped startups turn complexity into freedom. Learn more at mofo.com. Hello and welcome back to Startups Decoded. My name is Andy Walsh. If you're an entrepreneur or you're in a startup, you may give yourself the title of CEO. What that means on day one is very different to what it looks like when you reach an exit or IPO. And to get into the detail on that today, I'm really, really lucky to have Alisa Cohn join me. Alisa, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Andy. I'm so excited to be here.
We met at a conference and I had the pleasure of listening to you lead a panel, and I was really enthralled by that whole conversation. And fast forward to today, I've managed to lock you down to jump on my podcast, Startup Decoded. What you do is fascinating. And for people that really, really want to start a business because they're thinking about how they change the world, how they change their lives, but I don't think enough people really, really think through what that means as far as their role, the leadership that's required of them, the pressure that goes around it. And you deal with that every day in the people that you're coaching, the stories that you tell. Can you give us a little bit of a background on how you ended up doing what you do today? Because you've got a really unique set of skills.
Yeah, well, thank you for all that. So it's sort of two-sided because I became a coach and I started working with startups, right? So in terms of becoming a coach, I met a coach at a conference and I was like, what is that? I want to do that. I was super, super young, but I like violins played when I saw her speak and I followed her around and I just realized that is me. I have been coaching, quote unquote, people all my life. And so I just knew I had found my profession. Again, I was super young and I was on the sort of so-called fast track program to fast track to partner program at a professional services firm. And I realized I do not want to do that, but what do I want to do? Well, I want to become a coach. Well, I'm pretty young to become a coach. So I joined the startup world back in, 1999. That was a different time. And I was the CFO of one startup and the head of strategy of another startup. I got a ton of leadership experience, obviously. I definitely had startups in my blood. And then that all imploded, of course. And then I thought, well, okay, I'm going to become a coach now. So I started coaching individuals, coaching at companies. And then I really found my true love when I moved to New York. And I found that we were like building this, startup ecosystem, yay, in New York. And I thought, I want to be part of building that. I want to be part of startups. And so for 20 years, I've been working with startups at various different stages, like early stage, super early, also IPO and post-IPO companies, because I love coaching, which is really helping someone figure out where are they going, and how will they get there. And I love startups, the idea of like building something from nothing, constantly having to adapt and change, and also taking this very ambiguous, inchoate sort of set of things and turning into something valuable. It's just remarkable to me. And of course, the people involved in startups are remarkable to me.
Yeah, it takes a certain personality type to even take a leap of faith and start a business. There's a lot of aspiration and dreams. I had a conversation recently in talking about how mainstream startups have become. And I don't mean the actual companies. I mean, as an industry, 30 years ago, it was really niche and people would know about these big tech companies that it felt like from nowhere. But now it feels like there's a rite of passage almost as a human to have a go at a startup at some point.
Yeah, I mean, rite of passage is very interesting. I certainly think they have become, in the past 30 years, as you just said, much more exciting, much more glamorous. Obviously, the big ones much more lucrative and just normalized as a thing that you can do that's sort of more acceptable. I think that people who've never worked in a startup do tend to overly glamorize it and kind of they want to work at a startup and they want to be able to make a difference and they want to be able to be part of kind of inventing the future. And I guess I would say for as an insider, it's like, yes, there's a lot of that. And also it's not for everybody. There's somebody who a colleague of mine who a few years ago, and she had come from a large bank, but she had spent her whole career in large banks. And she was like, okay, I want to go to a startup. I'm so excited to make a difference. I want to really do something meaningful. And within a year, she was back at a large bank because guess what? She couldn't handle the chaos inside of a startup. She couldn't handle not having enough support, like her secretary, EA, whatever, whatever. And she couldn't handle like not knowing what to do when the printer was broken, you know? And that's the way it is in startups. And it takes a certain kind of person.
I went to the Silicon Alley a
I was
30-year
there.
anniversary party on Friday night, and
Yeah, I was
it
there.
was fascinating just talking to some people and the difference. Like, I go to events all the time, and the difference was that these were the people that had been around from the beginning of New York tech scene,
Yeah.
and there was a lot of battle scars in what people had taken on, what they achieved, and to operate in New York outside of San Francisco, which is obviously known as the main tech hub. But New York has evolved significantly, I'd say more so in the last 10 years rather than the last 30. But it took those people in the room and that effort and energy back then to actually create the ecosystem here in this city.
Definitely. Definitely. And when you say more progress in the last 10, I think that's the power of compounding in the sense that, 30, 35 years ago, it was really everyone making their inroads with sort of these iconic early companies and, the iconic early venture firms. And then that had to create an environment and an ecosystem and a community. And then that had to have time to gestate and kind of, compound on its own. And so I certainly think there's been more progress because of those foundations that were laid.
Yeah, agree. And trailblazing happens in multiple forms, right? It's the actual company that you create. But what happens by nature of that is you start to build a community around you of your
Right.
staff, the people that help service your business, the facilities that you work in. And that's what's compounded over that time. And I love the New York tech scene now. From a personal perspective, I couldn't live in San Francisco. I love New York City, but I
Yeah.
love now that it's such a robust and the breadth of people and businesses here is really significant.
Totally. And just to say about startup communities, I actually had Brad Feld on my podcast recently, and he wrote and has written a number of books, but one is the quote unquote, the startup community and the startup community way about how to build a startup community. And it's really about having the germs of the businesses and they, are able to create people who can then invest in the businesses. And then you have an ecosystem that builds up around them of like bankers and lawyers and others who can kind of help. And then suddenly you have support for founders who want to build something where it wasn't possible without that kind of supportive niche. So it really relies on these early people to then also create opportunity for the people who come after them.
Percent. And I've had Jason Schumann from Primary Ventures. I had Jeff Becker from Antler, and both of those VCs have created those environments where there's a large community. They do events, they have platform teams, they're supporting it. And that robust breadth of connection allows you to do a lot of things as a founder. And part of that is the support network, which is a lot of the space that you play in, because being a founder is hard work, like understatement of the year. But
Yeah.
I don't think people realize first time in how significant that is. For you, working with a founder from day one, which is probably not, I'm guessing, your common client, but working with someone who's done that versus someone who's been a CEO for 15 years, is publicly listed and dealing with a different scale. Like, the contrast of those two different types of characters is significant of how a person who starts on day one as just themselves to when they
Yeah.
get to that public listing stage. On that journey, what are the simple steps or phases that a CEO would go through on that journey?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's so funny because I also had Greg Gallant on my podcast. He's the CEO and co-founder of Muckrack, another iconic New York company. And he's been running Muckrack for 13 years, self-funded, completely bootstrapped until finally they got some funding. And what he said was, I was a CEO on day one, and I'm the CEO now, 13, 14 years later, and it's the same title, but it's a completely different role. So I think that really encompasses everything. When you're the founder CEO in early days, you really are like everything. You're the recruiter, you're the fundraiser, you are the tinkerer of the products, and your IT support, right? So you're just trying to get people to kind of believe in what you're trying to do. long ago, I was in Boston, and one of the startup guys that I talked to there, he said it's like you're tell the customers that the investors are going to be there. You tell the investors the customers are going to be there. You tell the employees that the investors are going to be there and the customers are going to be there. And you all meet in the parking lot somewhere, and you're like, oh, I can't believe this all worked out. And that's what it's like to be in the initial stage. And so it's very much like about your charisma, quote unquote, your personality, people getting people to believe in you, which by the way is also why you tend to hire the people who you went to college with, who you've already worked with, the sort of circle of trust around you. Those are your early hires. Then as you continue through the journey, a lot of things happen. You have to hire people outside of your own, kind of your own network. And then you have to figure out how to do that. You've got to be thinking about how to do enterprise sales, not just quote unquote founder sales. You've got to figure out how to communicate to now a team of like 50, 100, 200 people, which is very different from the way you were casually communicating when everybody was in the same room together, even either metaphorically on Zoom or actually physically on location. And then as you continue down that path, again, so many things change. The way you communicate, the way you structure, the formalization, the way you budget, those kinds of things. Everything requires more formality, but you have to be able to do that without giving up the kind of, the founder special sauce that allows you to be the spiritual leader of the company. And you're constantly, quote unquote, selling and inspiring ahead of where you actually are.
It's really interesting. And go back to your example earlier with the person who left banking, lasted a year and then went back in. But those things that you have to do. I recently just launched a sister podcast called Angels Decoded, which is similar format to what I'm doing, but focused around angel investment. And I literally was on the tools. I built the website, bought the domain, started the Substack, set up the YouTube channel and did everything myself. And it's not glamorous work, but it's just things that you have to do to get the job done. But I see it as an opportunity to create a future state. And having exited two businesses myself, I know what that journey looks like. And for me, I love getting my hands dirty. And quite interestingly, the later stages, and this is something that I'd love to explore with you a bit more, is that you start doing something that you're passionate about. You've got your hands on the tools. The more you grow, the more people you employ, you end up running the business and managing people and actually not doing anything of the fun stuff that you were passionate about to start with. And that's a real shift in mindset and what your day looks like from 9 till 5, call it, which never is the case, of course. But in that 9 to 5 moment, how you started versus even 2 years in, it looks very different. Helping someone understand that from day one, what are the things that you can start to explore a little bit to play out and stress test yourself as a human and how you process that versus practically how you build systems to plan for the future state?
Yeah, it is so much the heart of the matter, actually. When in my book From Startup to Grown Up, I'll just hold it up here. In my book From Startup to Grown Up, I spoke to one of my former clients, Dennis Crowley of Foursquare, speaking of OG New York tech. And one thing that he said, which was so poignant, is that as you grow, you have to delegate. So first you start delegating the budget stuff and you're like happy to get rid of it. And then you start delegating, sales and other things that, are not so hard for you to give up, but closer and closer you come to the bone of delegating the things that mean the most to you. In his case, product for sure. And that becomes very painful. So I think there's a number of misconceptions that founders have when they get into the business. First of all, I think it's going to be quick. It is not going to be quick. I don't know what it's going to be, but it's not going to be quick. It's going to be painful. It's going to be more work and more time than you think it is supposed to be. So that's number one. The second thing is that you absolutely got into this because you like to tinker with your hands on something specific. And ultimately, that is not going to be your job anymore. You're going to be able to have to give all that fun stuff off to somebody else. And you're going to have to be dealing with the business angle. So that might be external relations, probably large scale founder sales. Certainly things like, dealing with the board and, that kind of stuff, which is not why you started tinkering with the tools to begin with. And then the third thing is that you're going to have to give up your kind of natural casual style, like just speaking off the cuff, like inventing ideas, brainstorming. Founders are very creative. And you're going to have to be very disciplined in the way you talk to your people, because the problem is that when you're the founder CEO, especially as you get larger and people don't know you very well, they hold you in reverence. And so therefore, your suggestions are orders, your inklings are orders, your brainstorms are orders, and your orders are orders. And it's like you're standing up speaking from a bullhorn. So you've got to realize that as soon as you say, maybe we should do this, suddenly it's kind of done, no matter how important it was to you, no matter how much extra effort it took. They're not going to be telling you that. They're going to want to please you and just get it done. So there's all these different dynamics that you have to be ready for. I guess I would also say that I've worked with multiple founders who at some point along the journey said some version of, I wish I could, it's like, I wish I could leave this company, my baby, the baby I started, my company. But right now, I wish I could leave this company and start over fresh. I wouldn't make all those mistakes. I wouldn't have these people. I'd have a different group of people. And it's kind of this idealistic view of, I've ruined this company. I need to go find another one or build another one. And I think that is just like, that's the normal part of the grind. Scott Belsky wrote a book called The Messy Middle. And on my podcast, he also talked about, this notion of what it's like to be in the middle of it and how exhausting it is and how you don't know always you're making progress. And the idea that you anyway have to motivate and inspire people towards the end, even when you can't see it. It's just a very challenging journey that takes a lot. I mean, it takes a lot of you. I believe it's like the best vehicle for personal growth there is, but doesn't mean it's going to be fun.
No. And I had a framework played to me, which I've adopted myself. And it talked about three phases of that. First phase being growth hacking and the ability to just try things, learn and learn very quickly. The second stage being the formalization and understanding of data, insights, building SOPs, things that allow you to scale and multiply. And then the third stage being the scale phase, where you then start to use that information to grow what you're doing. And for me, those three stages allow you to do a lot of different things from a planning perspective, and allows you to think about the people you need, the structure you need, at what point you grow, and playing the long game. And your book, From Startups to Grownup, almost feels like that is the journey that you go on. And you've got the book, you've got the podcast, and you do the coaching yourself. Those three phases, that messy middle that you just called out there, is the part when all of a sudden things start to feel real. But then that's when your role as a CEO starts to change. That growth hacking, you sit in a room with your team, you're doing everything together. The culture is very, very different to what it is when you get to the third stage, because you go from hands dirty, as I said earlier, to then managing expectations and manifesting. You talked before around, you have to believe in a future state and double down on a future state. It's one of those things that you're playing this game. So to step through those stages, the first one in that growth hacking part, I think one of my lessons that I learned, I'd love to get your perspective on this, is that you've got friends, you've got people that believe in you and trust you, and you've got a culture of this closeness. But when you go into that next stage, sometimes the person who's your friend and worked alongside you, you have to have some tough conversation with them. And it can create a lot of pressure and tension in that dynamic. How do you start to build a culture on that day one that is scalable, that doesn't create a future problem based upon the type of relationship that you have with your team?
Yeah, it's such a profound question. And everything you said is so accurate. Like, the truth is that, first of all, founders are not thinking about it. They're thinking about like this cool thing that we're going to do, and we're experiment and tinker our way into it. Number two, they're hiring all their friends, as anybody would, because their friends believe in them. They believe in their friends. They understand the work ethic. They can all work together very well. But what they're forgetting is that at some point, when and if we grow, and hopefully we will, like when and if we succeed, you're going to have to find more experienced people, which are very likely not those friends that you hired in the early days. And so what I think, in my book, I have scripts, about 14 scripts at the end of my book, to help you navigate delicate conversations, difficult conversations. Is one is the conversation you need to have with people as you hire them early days, which is like hard to think. If you don't have the experience, it's hard to think about. But the conversation is, I'm so excited about the startup. I'm so excited you're joining the team. I want you to know that we're building a consequential company here. And I don't think you'd be joining me if you didn't believe that. As such, what's going to happen is at some point, we're going to have earned the right to hire more experienced people. When that comes, I'm going to be taking a look at you and your role and seeing if we need to maybe bring somebody in. When and if that happens, obviously, I'm going to find somebody who will definitely mentor you and help you grow, which is so important to everything, and certainly to me and to our culture. But I need you to know that over time, my hope is that everyone is going to, in some ways, outgrow their role, and we're going to have to find more experienced people inside of the company in order to continue helping it grow. So having that upfront dialogue with people, even if they forget about it when the time comes, right, is actually helpful in setting it up for yourself to realize for yourself that nothing early days is going to be forever. And these people who are going to bring you halfway down the field, which is really meaningful, and you have loyalty to them. But if you want the company to grow, and if they want their company to grow, and they have ownership, so hopefully they do, you're going to need to find a way to probably replace them or layer over them or something with people who have been there and done that before.
I love this advice. It's playing the long game very elegantly because I guarantee you that 99.9% of founders are not even thinking about the future state and trying to proactively manage expectations because the people that come in early, you have to have a certain state in mind and a high tolerance for risk, right? To be able to join a business that probably has no money or limited money, cash flow is terrible, high risk, but there's a high return potential as well. You're likely to get equity, as you called out there. You feel like you're part of the culture and the whole system, but your role almost becomes redundant once you start to reach the scale phase because you can't have someone just do the breadth of skills. You start to bring in probably more specialists that know precisely what they need to do to take it from that 1 to 10 stage, like once you start getting that growth. So managing that ahead of time is really important. And as you said, whether they remember that conversation or not, I think it sets a really nice precedent as far as we're doing this. I appreciate what you're able to do, but we're going to reach a point in the future where what you're doing won't look the same. And I want you to be ready for that, but embrace it in a way that's going to help you grow ultimately as well.
Yeah, totally. And I think what you also said was so important, like the risk tolerance of those early employees and the kind of what they're looking for in a job is just different from the later employees. So early stage, they do have a lot higher risk tolerance. Also, they want to do a bunch of different things and they want to do them the way they want to do them and kind of invent the processes. When you are later stage, you need to build processes and then stick to them. You can't just be doing anything you want to do. You got to be communicating and systematizing what you're working on. It's a larger context. Some people consider it feeling more, bureaucratic or corporate or something. One of the companies that I worked in, it was 100 people growing to 500 that year. And one of the employees said to me, "Oh yeah, I just don't like this big company stuff." 100 people, big company stuff. I'm like, "Why don't you go to IBM?" You have no idea. But for him, it felt bureaucratic already. And so that was not the right role for him. Now, at the same time, later stage, let's say mid stage, we're talking about now, those kinds of people who come in, they want more stability. They want to create process. They actually really want to have process created and then run that process. And then personally, they want a career path. They want a 401k. They want benefits, right? The sort of corporate structure is much more important to them. So that's when you have to have like HR come in and build career ladders and, do performance appraisal and have kind of the artifacts and detritus and the details of a larger company that, the early stage employees are like, "I can't believe we're doing this." So that's when you really have to think as a CEO and as a founder that that's going to be an inflection point for sure.
If you're building the future, you deserve a legal partner built for it. Morrison Foster, the legal edge behind the world's boldest innovators. They go by Mofo and are the team behind Startups Decoded. For decades, Mofo has helped startups turn complexity into freedom. They combine deep market insight, tailored legal strategy, and a Mofo passion. Discover how Mofo can support you. Mofo.com. In that, do you think that there's a point in a business when it stops becoming a startup and starts becoming a fully fledged corporation? Because
Mm.
it's nice to hold on to the startup mentality because it sets a certain tone and culture and an opportunity. I'll give you a really good example where get on LinkedIn and I see someone, it's like ex-Apple, ex-Microsoft, ex-IBM. And I'm like, sure, but you're a tiny cog in a massive wheel. And like, did you help design the iPhone? Did you help build Watson at IBM in the charge? Or are you just running an SOP in your vertical? Does it actually elevate you? I don't think so. For me, I look at someone in an innovation sense, if I was to employ them myself, who's getting their hands dirty and building things from nothing, particularly in that early stage. Like you're basically in that type of role in a later stage startup is you're playing a very functional role versus someone who's a true innovator. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, well, that's totally fair to say, although it's funny you asked that question. Is there a point where a company stops being a startup? Well, talk to Amazon about that. Do they consider themselves the world's largest startup, right? So who knows? Also, you're exactly right. Like I'll just talk about Amazon for a second. Like you're at Amazon executing, being a cog in the wheel, executing something that was invented 15 years ago, not by you. Okay. That's different from you're at Amazon building, the Kindle. You're at Amazon coming up with, their strategy around integrating Twitch and then running Twitch and then adding services to Twitch, right? So it really depends like everything on role, and you can't go by resume. And I think that one thing I would say is that founders get glamorized by resume, like, oh, they were Amazon, they were Apple, they were IBM, they were Microsoft, whatever, they were LinkedIn, whatever. That means like, oh, they know what they're doing. But then it's very helpful to then check in with people as you are interviewing them to seek evidence about what they actually accomplished. Were they just at the company? Were they in the room when something happened? Were they executing a process? Or were they actually the person adding value to that process, inventing the process, making sure that that process even like ran appropriately? Whatever it is, get evidence. Don't just assume like, oh, LinkedIn knows what they're doing.
Absolutely. And I love something you said there. I want to just like poke at a little bit in the sense of when innovation has a process. It's like, is that innovation? I don't think so. It's like the ability to be able to think about how do we come up with an idea but turn it into a system so everyone knows what's happening. It slows it down. I'm always curious, like you've worked with huge companies, New York Times, Etsy, household names, right? How do big corporations think about innovation in the sense where you start to empower a team? And there's people that are really focused on doing it where they'll have a team breaking things, finding what competitors are doing and having a think tank, and they've got freedom to just do almost what they like with no commercial outcome. Have you seen some good examples of larger corporations where they do really have that innovation culture embedded into what they're doing and it hasn't become too systematized?
To me, what I have seen is pockets. So when you're talking about a large company, and I've worked with many large companies, it's the company itself is this monolithic thing, which I don't think is always helpful to examine. What is helpful to examine is the divisions or areas inside of the company, and either they're quote unquote innovative or they're not. And I'll give you two examples. One company I worked with, they had me do an offsite for this division, and they were like, we want to do something super innovative, like, what are they called? Those, the moonshots. We want to do this moonshot thing. And I was like, great, let's do it. Moonshots and da da da. And then immediately it's, well, not too innovative, not too risky, not too moonshotty, like, okay, so it's got to be a little moonshotty. It's got to feel like a moonshot. That's the thing. It's got to feel innovative. We're like doing innovation theater, right? So that's kind of what came up for me as I was doing this. But I would contrast that to large company I was working with the head of tax. I'm going to repeat that. The head of tax.
Sounds so glamorous.
Exactly. That's my glamorous life, right? So it turned out that so I worked with him really on helping him find, let's say, his inner voice and his inner rudder. And as a result of that work, he actually came up with a massively innovative idea on the topic of tax that saved the company millions of dollars. And so I think it's so interesting when you get inside the companies to really see what innovation is, where it comes from, how it's created, is this real journey of discovery and even like rethinking what does it mean to be innovative.
I reference this all the time, but the book David Epstein range, I'd love to get David on the show. I just love the way that he thinks and his research goes deep as well. And one of the things they talk about in the book is the ability where you work in a company for so long, outcomes historically, personalities, what's got approved, what hasn't, etc. So there's all this bias that you bring and the ability to bring out someone outside to be able to think about it. And they were a bunch of eclectic people with really specific expertise, and it was ultimately problem solving. And they had all these people come together and they couldn't solve this. So they put it out on some kind of obscure zine or blog or something somewhere, and someone in a completely irrelevant industry managed to solve the problem that these people have been working on for months because they had no bias, they had no history, and they applied what they knew from a different industry to solve the problem that they had. And for me, the structure in that is what is really profound for me because bringing someone else in to pull apart what you do and put it back together again, particularly today where innovation is happening at such scale that even if you're operating on a model 2 years old, you're already way out of date. So that structure of having someone come in and almost blow things up is really important for large corporations.
Yeah, I love that. There was a kind of a trend where I'm not sure if they're doing this as much, but there was a trend a few years ago in OD circles where you'd have these kind of like peer groups. And so the idea is that people outside of your company would come in and give you a day, like, peers of yours, and would give you a day of looking at your business and talking to your people. And it was like, it was called a process. I can't remember what it was called, but it was really powerful because someone just coming in and just like asking questions and why do you do it this way? And, talking through it both highlights and surfaces areas of, let's say, improvement, but it also, as you're explaining things, it helps you think out loud, which is also a very powerful thing to do. And also the idea of, people solving problems based on insights from all sides, I think has been very well researched, very well trod. And I think it's amazing that when a company or when like a division or a leader doesn't understand how important it is to bring in different points of view into the meeting, I think that's just it's just a lost opportunity.
Yeah, agree. Having a consultant come in that has specific expertise can play a role to change thinking. If you're a CEO and you've got a team of people, to be able to maximize that person, how do you create an environment where your internal team is open to change? They're brought along on that journey because if you have someone very senior come in that's brought in intentionally to drive a deliberate shift and innovate and evolve things, internal team members can really get their back up and be nervous, can be stressed out about change. Is there a way to structure that where people feel empowered that where they're going from and where they're going to is actually to the collective benefit, including themselves?
Yeah, I think step one is hire people who are like that. People are constantly asking me, how do I motivate my people? And the secret is very easy. Hire self-motivated people. Then let them be motivated. So it's the same thing. Hire curious people who are interested in getting to the right answer as opposed to, guarding their turf. That's number one. And then number two is setting up a safe space. Because the truth is that, like, if you and I are having this conversation and the truth is that my insights from this conversation are going to get you fired, yeah, I can imagine that you might be a little uncomfortable about that, right? So it's really got to be we're all here learning together, we're all here to improve, and that people are, if they're doing a good job, are safe and we're going to find a role for them. So I think those baseline, opportunities are there. But then I think it's also about creating the culture where Netflix was famous for this. What was it? Reed Hastings was up on a presentation and was looking at some very confronting data that really pointed to his own flaws as a CEO. And he was like, huh, interesting. And let's moved on and then moved on. So, and not like, oh, this is not that, not like in a defensive way, but specifically, huh, this is really interesting. Good analysis. Let's move on. Right. And so if you can sort of take that kind of tone and vibe and then spread it out to your people and constant be like, oh, that's such great analysis. It's good for us to know that. Let's see if we can make some changes as opposed to who's to blame and how could you have done this? That is really the key to that kind of culture.
One of my favorite structures is psychological safety. I talk about it a lot, and it is really structure of what you've just defined. The bad version of that is when you have the hippo, which is the highest paid person's opinion, and that culture of top down, just decision making, shutting down innovation. And if you're able to go bottom up where everyone feels like that they're on an equal playing field, and you have to be vulnerable to do that, you have to admit what you know and what you don't know and create an environment where people feel like if they've got an idea that they can put it forward and it's tested in an equal playing field where everyone has the ability to say something. You just don't know where innovation is going to come from in a large corporation, and creating a structure and a model where there's a stage almost for people to speak up and do that and try new ideas is really important. And to set a framework from a cultural perspective, as a CEO and as a leader, are there things that you've seen work well to create an environment where people feel like they're empowered to put forward suggestions and feel like they're not going to get their hands burnt by making that step forward?
Yeah, the first key is that when you're in a meeting, leaders speak last, right? Because otherwise everyone's looking to see what you, the boss, is going to say. The second thing is to actually admit when you're wrong, celebrate when you're wrong, celebrate someone else's better idea, those kinds of tools. And then the third is, and I think I have a few clients in particular I'm thinking of who do this really well. It's like, especially when more junior people speak up, the affirmation to that and the sort of uptake of their ideas makes them feel empowered. The truth is that two things make people feel empowered. Number one, feeling listened to. And by listened to, it's like mirrored back, understood, appreciated for their input. And then number two, when their ideas are taken up and run with. And that also makes people feel empowered. So when you start doing those things for people who are not, as you say, the highest paid individual, that is where empowerment really takes teeth.
Love that. The ability to do storytelling internally from a cultural perspective, even externally, if someone has come up with an idea and it turns into an amazing product innovation or something that changes the culture internally, that human storytelling is something we're going to see so much more of in 2026 as AI has just made content the noisiest space in the world. I see a real opportunity for people to become the heroes because if you've got a business that has millions of customers and you have one person that comes up with an idea that makes all of those people's lives much easier or better and servicing them, actually making them the hero, and that creates a really deep connection beyond what the product does itself.
Yeah, 100% agree that storytelling is going to be such a key skill, number one. Number two, what you just said, very powerful, really being just intentional, right? So it's not about me and my benefits and the things that I'm giving you. It's more our customers using this product, becoming heroes as a result of it, making them heroes internally. Then the third thing really has to do with the skill of storytelling because so many leaders, I think, they default to data. They default to broad vagaries, right? Sort of, like very large statements that don't have a lot of concreteness. And so the stories are anecdotes with details that help people connect into what they're saying and also make it memorable. So that storytelling piece, I think, is such an essential skill for leaders. But then also, if you're an employee right now in a large organization and you're trying to be noticed, learning to tell your story, communicate what you're doing with specific facts, with specific details, connecting with other stakeholders, making them the heroes. All of that is part of a skill that you need to learn to stand out in your workplace.
One of the things that I'm focused on right now, and I'm literally sitting in my new studio, which is exciting, but the space that we have is to actually help think about that from a very foundational perspective. As an early stage founder, what is your story? What are the things that you have with your values, your purpose, that anchor yourself into the company and build a culture where people feel like they know who you are. And even if they don't engage with you day to day as you grow, they get a real sense of what you are and what you stand for. And I think that that's important because that permeates internally and externally out to the wider business. From a formalization perspective, you touched on it earlier on in the conversation, but I'm really fascinated from a messaging standpoint and scripting. Like when you're in that early hustle stage, you can sit around the table, people have a real sense of who you are. As you grow, it's likely that you won't even engage with the majority of your wider organization, right? It gets so big that it's impossible to speak to everyone or even have met everyone in that point. How do you start to scale yourself as a CEO and leader with the stories that you're telling and that's internally and externally? How do you formalize that into something where it feels like that you can multiply?
I know. It's like the age-old question. First of all, it does get embedded in the culture, right? So it's really about culture is a reflection of the founder, whether it's like, let's move fast or let's sort of celebrate our customer or whatever it is. That's a result and reflection of the founder. So just recognizing that. The second thing is that those founder stories, those early day stories, those kind of like what it was like, your quirks, your interesting, way of showing up, all of that is going to be on a large stage. So just being mindful and intentional about how you run all hands, how you make presentations, what you might start with, rituals around what you might start with, what you might end with, but then also most importantly, really having your leaders tell that story to their people and having that cascade down. Because at the end of the day, people do see you on a large stage or they see you in the elevator or wherever it is, and they're like, uncomfortable or whatever. So engaging with people in those ways, but really they're going to engage with you through their manager, through your leaders. And so really what I think founders miss in particular is recognizing that they have to intentionally explain to their leaders what their expectations are as it relates to managing their people. And that includes the founder mythology, the stories we're telling, the ways we do things around here. All that stuff has to get translated kind of formally so that leaders know what they're inculcating into their people.
There's a case study I wrote up about Notion, and recently they overhauled the way that they do their storytelling. And it was quite fragmented across different teams. And they basically just threw it all out and started again fresh. And what they've done is unify their story. So everything that they say internally to their team, externally to customers, to press, to investors, etc., is all coming from one central place. And it means that it's easy for anyone to be able to look at that, learn it, repeat it, and have a foundation to come from. And that needs to be repetitious though as well. And as a great leader, if you're doing press interviews or on stage at conferences, that repetition comes through. And it's really hard for me as someone who loves a chat. I can repeat things, but being scripted versus staying true to yourself is really hard. Do you work with CEOs on public speaking and thinking about that articulation of story and how they're bringing the sense of themselves through, but also following the company story?
Yeah, a little bit. And really the key there is not so much I definitely don't work with them in particular on the words, although I do a little bit of that, but that's really somebody else's expertise, not mine. But my expertise is around how are you showing up? So what do you say to yourself before you walk on that stage? What do you want to be? Who do you want to show up as? What do you want them to see and feel and do as you're on that stage? And then also, sort of what is necessary right now? Like, what does the business need from you? And what does this moment need from you? Those are the kinds of things to really hone into as you walk on that stage.
Great advice. To connect the dots back to what you're doing day to day, from startup to Grownup, your book and podcast, if you were to read the book, what are some of the things that you share in there that are valuable for founders to think about at this stage?
I know. Well, so many things. My book is divided into 3 sections: managing you, managing them, and managing the business. So those are the dimensions along which you have to grow. So managing you has to do with recognizing that the culture is going to be a reflection of you, assessing and really thinking about your strengths and weaknesses and kind of how you're showing up. And then also managing your gremlins. Like, it's a really long, hard journey. And so you have doubts, you have insecurity, you have imposter syndrome. And I have a lot of strategies about how to help you with imposter syndrome, which is a very big topic inside of my book. In fact, as I've talked to over 100 founders, we've talked a lot about imposter syndrome on my podcast, also called From Startup to Grownup. And so if people are curious about how actual founders are dealing with actual imposter syndromes, there's like tons of expertise around there. The second thing is managing them. So it's really learning how to lead people, how to give feedback, how to hold people accountable, how to set up the structure for performance appraisal, how to make sure that your leaders are leading other people, how to learn to manage and delegate. Everyone talks about like, oh, I'm a good leader, but not a good manager. Like, it's a good thing. Well, actually, your job requires both of those tools, right? And those vibes. So it's important to also just have some of the basic skills of management. And the last thing is managing the business. So constantly people will say to me, oh, it's great, we went up this quarter. And I'm like, that's fantastic. But like, what if you should have gone up even more? Like, who knows, right? What did you forecast? How did you set goals? How are you running internal meetings? Even how are you managing how are you managing the board? All of that has to do with managing the business.
So good. And I realized when you were saying that, I think I need to stop interviewing authors on my podcast. I've got quite a pile of books now that I need to read, and I don't seem to have enough time in the day to get through them. So I've got to
Yeah.
put my hand up and say guilty. I've not read it yet, but it literally is on a pile of books that are in my to-do list. And I will
We'll
get to
bring it to the
yeah, I am going to do a reshuffle on that for sure. But I do listen to the podcast, and that's worth checking out too. For people that are curious to learn more outside of the book and the podcast, what's the best way to reach out to you, Alisa?
Well, you can definitely follow me on LinkedIn. I'm very active there, but you can also come to my website. And as I said, I had 14 scripts in the back of my book to help you with delicate conversations. I have 5 additional ones on my website to help you navigate difficult conversations, delicate conversations, and one to make your life better. And that is alisacohn.com/scripts. No E's in my name, ALISACOHN. alisacohn.com/scripts.
Perfect. And I'll make sure that I share all of that information, and you can check out my LinkedIn and find all of those links. This is so good. And for any founders who are listening to this, it's never, ever too early to think about a future state, because what you need to do in the future is defined from day one. Little things, that probably in the moment feel like small decisions can become very big decisions and later on. So this is a really helpful peek into that later stages. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this with me today.
Thank you, Andy. I loved your questions. It was so great to talk to you.
Thanks for listening to Startups Decoded. If today's conversation helped you think differently, share it with a founder in your network. And don't forget to subscribe for real-world startup insights every week. We really value your support. If you're interested in partnering with us, email hello@startupsdecoded.com. I'm Andy Walsh. I'll see you next week.